So welcome to the New Sonic Field. This is New Music, New College's online playlist and series of interviews with alumni from the New College of Florida. And I'm Professor Mark Dancigers, and I'm really excited today to have the opportunity to talk with Susanna Payne-Passmore. And Susanna has been working as a composer and studying as a composer for the past several years since graduating from New College, and is currently a graduate student studying for their doctorate at the University of Pennsylvania. And we're really excited to speak with Susanna today. And to start us off, I would just like to ask you, when did you graduate from New College? And tell us a little bit about what you've been doing since then.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Mark. I graduated in 2012 with an area of concentration in music composition. And after graduating, I took a Fulbright to the Republic of Georgia to teach and study the local folk music, which is a very early example of polyphonic composition, which is fascinating to look at. After I came back, I honestly just spent a few years paying off my student loans, which were thankfully fairly minimal due to the generosity of New College, and developing portfolio for applying to master's programs. I got in at the University of Oregon and completed my master's there, studying with Dr. Robert Keir and Dr. David Crum. And while I was there, I founded a chamber orchestra called the Composers of Oregon Chamber Orchestra, which is still around and exists solely to premiere new student works. And I also wrote a chamber opera called Captain, which features a genderqueer protagonist navigating a magical world. After that, I once again restarted the application process, and I just started this past month at the University of Pennsylvania, working on my doctorate.
And that is so fantastic. Tell us a little bit more about the chamber music group the chamber orchestra of Oregon. That sounds like a really cool project. What made you want to start that?
Well, it definitely was the next iteration of a project I started at New College, which was the New Ensemble, which was modeled on the Now Ensemble. I just loved the experience of creating music with my friends. In the orchestra, I was collaborating as an administrator. I don't really have the performance chops to contribute in a meaningful way, playing new music. But I really thought about how to create a collaborative space where we accepted pieces by application from anybody in the composition community in the area, and gave them feedback, whether it was accepted or not. But part of our panel would always be members of the orchestra who were basically elected to represent their section of the orchestra. So everything was, since we don't have the expertise as composers to decide, well, is this playable? We tried to create a collaborative system of governance to really give everyone the best chance of showing up. And so we would select pieces by how well we felt that they would fit our ensemble, and tried to remain as stylistically and aesthetically neutral as possible, and just let the voices of the composers that were there be represented at the concerts.
That's amazing. So you've, in addition to your work as a composer, you've also started to kind of open up opportunities for other people and create new ways of making opportunities happen for composers and performers to work together and be collaborative under new structures. That's really cool.
Yeah, governance is a big interest of mine, both from living in a cooperative housing organization for 3 years in Oregon, and seeing how those systems could be really effectively implemented in the musical sphere as well.
That's fantastic. So this is always a little bit of a tricky question, but how would you describe the work that you're doing as a composer right now?
Yeah, that is always a tricky question. I think one thing is helpful to say that I tend to work with acoustic instruments and voices. And the most fascinating musical parameter to me is always harmony, which when I say that, some people are like, aren't we in the 21st century? But I think that there's still so much to explore of how harmony creates affect and how that affect really changes how we feel. It's almost like telepathy, or a very unreliable form of telepathy where what somebody ends up feeling may be totally different from me, but if they do feel, then something really cool has happened. But my harmonic preferences definitely tend towards complexity and dissonance. I love to tell stories with my pieces, especially ones that can't really be told in words. And I think that my music reflects a lot of the world building and the science fiction and fantasy that I have consumed over the years, especially with an eye towards the transformative potential of imagination in world building, rather than just the escapism of some stories. Ultimately, if I can encourage the listener to engage with newness or novelty or something that is strange or dissonant and find it engaging and beautiful, then I feel like I have succeeded in doing what I set out to do as a composer.
So what was a moment at New College that was inspiring to you or transformative or something that you still remember today?
I think the thing that affected me most was hearing the music of the Now Ensemble, because it was the first time that I had ever heard music that was within the realm of classical music, broadly speaking, in that it was notated and highly complex, but it was also related to this paradigm of people making music together and being both composers and performers. Um, I just thought that was so cool, and I think that that's really informed my musical practices. Even though I hate performing, I'm still trying to become a composer who can also perform, because having that kind of collaboration with other people is just so wonderful. I'll always pursue it, even though I'm a little behind like true professional performers, and someday I'll get there.
Well, thanks for the kind words. Yeah, I mean, so for many who are watching this probably know, but for those who don't, I play in the group that Susanna mentioned, which is Now Ensemble, and we are a kind of a collective of composers and performers, and some composers perform, and some of the performers compose, and not everybody has a kind of a mixed role in that way, but many of us do, but I think part of the way that we've made music over the years has been that the kinds of things that we do, the kind of music that we either make together or the composers that we work with, come out of this sort of shared sense of interest. And anyway, yeah, it's very touching, and I'm honored that that was a inspiring moment for you. Um, uh, and it's really, you know, it's exciting that you've kind of taken that in your own directions. You know, you mentioned your work with the chamber orchestra in Oregon, and you're performing now, or kind of working on performance now.
Yeah, I think it's among my colleagues or my peers, I think a lot of people are interested in that paradigm of sort of not just being the composer who writes and here you go, you play, but actually really being deeply engaged in multiple parts of the music making process. And I think you guys were really ahead of the curve there.
Oh, thanks. Well, yeah, I mean, you know, composers and performers are, of course, natural collaborators, but the way that a musical situation is set up doesn't always allow for that in the way that both composers and performers might want it to. So yeah, then there's the question of, well, okay, well, what would a situation that would be productive in that particular realm look like? And it's not necessarily an easy question to answer because both tasks are quite difficult. Spending the time to compose and then, putting together performances, they're both demanding at a high level.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not necessarily a no-brainer to figure out how to do all of that. But that's really awesome to hear that that's an interest of yours.
I think you imagined it and built it, and now the world is starting to reflect that imagination a little bit more, at least in my age group. A lot of people are starting groups that are just like that.
Well, and
all
it's
sorts of
interesting too.
varieties.
It's interesting. I was talking with the Jack Quartet a couple of weeks back, and they mentioned that they are seeing an increasing number of composers who leave a lot of decisions up to the performers. So that might be one way in which that particular trend is manifesting itself at the moment. In other words, like, okay, some of this is going to be, well, I'm going to write it out and then it will show up on your stand. But then there's going to be this other component where you're going to have a lot of freedom and choice. And of course, there's many approaches that blend notation and improvisation, or whatever you might want to call it, in various ways. But that's one approach. But there are others to kind of working on that set of issues. So you mentioned harmony a little earlier on.
Yes.
Harmony is great, by the way. I mean, it's totally okay to be into harmony. It has a long pedigree.
Yes.
I guess. But actually, so talking about the music that you've submitted for our playlist, this is a song called "Burnt Norton." Mm-hmm. The harmony is really striking. I don't know if that's what you might want to talk about with this particular song, but maybe you could just give us an introduction to that composition and tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. This was the composition that I wrote while I was at the University of Oregon, and we have this fantastic collaboration with singer Esteli Gomez, she is a singer but also a musician, and her ability to create sound in space, in the physical location, is just incredible. And there's this really visceral reaction when you're listening to her. So I was extremely excited to work with her, and kind of intimidated. And that's sort of how I ended up going into this project. I selected the poem because my mother mentioned that she really liked T.S. Eliot. So I picked up a book of his poetry, and it was his 4 quartets. And this is the first poem on the first page. And I didn't even read anything else in the book because I just started to read it, and it was so timey-wimey, sort of weird sci-fi perceptions of time, which I'm totally into. And I found that he manages to write an experience of time in this poem that is almost beyond what language, or at least our language, is typically capable of expressing. And so I wanted to put the feeling of reading that poem into the music, and to generate an affect that maybe other people would connect with that strange feeling. On a musical level, the material mostly comes from just a little improvisation at the piano. And then I actually used a little bit of set theory to sort of go in and be like, what am I really doing here? What relationships between intervals does my ear like, and what is it intuitively doing? And then with that knowledge, that helped me develop the material more and more. And the vocal line is kind of just set as something above those textures that's really smooth generally, and lyrical, and hopefully not too difficult to sing. It's very song-like. But the texture underneath is not a typical song-like flavor.
Yeah, and you mentioned the vocal line kind of floating above what the piano's doing, and I was really amazed when I listened to the recording how it's a really fine composition and a really strong performance. Um,
Yes.
um, I was sort of amazed to hear the vocal line in particular and that quality of hovering in particular because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but often it sounds like the notes that are in the melodic line are not necessarily in the accompaniment. They're sort of pulled out of thin air.
Yes, which makes it difficult to sing.
But it doesn't
Much more
sound
so.
difficult. Yeah.
I think I'll have to credit Esteli for making it seem easy.
Yeah.
She makes a lot of things sound easy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, so yeah, we're really excited to be able to share that with everyone. So please go and have a listen. Oh, and there are Cortalis in this
Yes, there
song
are.
too. Yeah. How did you choose Cortalis?
I wanted something that you'll hear at the beginning. There's this ping. I was really fascinated by super high, super low registers on the piano, and I just wanted a little more of the high register. So the Cortalis are almost an extension of the percussiveness of the piano in that.
Yeah.
And I've also thought it might be possible for the singer to actually be the one to hit the Cortalis. It also gives it this sort of ritual, it invokes like a ritual-like atmosphere for the whole work.
Yeah, great. So what is an upcoming project for you that you're working on or something you're looking forward to?
I am currently working on a commission for Abigail Sperling, who is a flute professor at Linfield College. And this is for flute plus flute quartet, so very fluty. And it's been a little delayed because of the pandemic and all of the pandemonium involved with that, but I'm deep into the middle movement, and it's a very impressionistic work that reflects, on one level, it sort of makes me think of a snowy landscape, and that sort of very quiet, strange world after snowfall. Yeah, that's what I'm mainly working on right now. And I'm just starting a new collaboration with a congregation to see if we can find a way to make their Zoom collaborations of music a little more enjoyable. I'm asking them to record their favorite lines from a set of hymns on a topic like environmental justice, and just pick any line, any phrase that speaks to them, just record it, send it to me. If they don't want to sing, they can speak. And then my job as the composer is to weave those fragments together into a compelling whole that represents the spiritual life of their congregation, as well as the individual spiritual life of each person. So two very different projects.
Yeah, that's really cool. Are you using several different registers of flute, or are they?
Definitely, yes. Playing with all the registers.
Yeah.
Except for, I'm going to use bass, alto, and piccolo, and of course, flute.
Yeah. Those instruments are so great. Yeah, flute choir music is really a lot of fun. Cool, and your project with the congregation, that sounds fascinating. So I'm so glad to hear that you've been kind of moving forward even while all of this kind of
very slowly
stuff is happening.
It's okay to take a break when shit hits the fan.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of restarting my composition process at this point after a break.
Yeah. That's great. So how can we learn more about your work?
You can check out my website. It's susannacomposes.com. And if you Google my name, I'm the only Susanna Payne-Passmore in existence. So I'm sure you'll find my SoundCloud and possibly my Facebook.
Fantastic. So thank you so much. So it's been such a treat to talk with you.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to hearing everyone's music.
Thank you, Susanna.